Okay, this is blzkn, and today we're going to be doing Uro versus Kashimo. I have Kaya with me. He makes a lot of great JJK content, so make sure to go check out his links down below. And today we're going to be debating who would win between the two ancient sorcerers. So first, let's start off with Uru. So Uru has the ability of sky manipulation, and depending on which translation you have, which will be something that comes up later on in the discussion, she potentially has reverse curse technique. The TCB makes it imply that she does, whereas the Viz translation, Ryu implies that if she had it, it would be a hell of a feat to restore her arm. So potentially we are unaware on whether she has reverse curse technique, so that is a potential thing. However, her ability of sky manipulation distorts space, and she also is very adept in hand-to-hand combat, and I believe at this moment in time she's taken the dub. So before I get to that, what do you think about Kashimo?
I mean, I think there's a lot of what ifs to this matchup because their abilities just really collide in very, very weird ways. Like, it doesn't match very well. Obviously, you know, a classic Kashimo fan. I got him winning this fight. But a lot of things do have to go in his way, and we have to make a lot of assumptions in his favor for him to win this. So, because yeah, he's like a powerful sorcerer, had the most points. Even of our domain, even of our curse technique, he's just insanely powerful.
100%. But let's start off with one of those what if scenarios, and that starts off with obviously his curse energy properties. So at this moment of time, we've been having a little bit of a discussion based on what would happen, and the first thing that was indicated is he obviously has to touch the person to add his charges. However, Kaio, and you can get into that, he says potentially could the charges be added when they were blocking. I am also not too sure myself, and because of the statement I was implying not, but he made a lot of good points which could indicate that it should still affect him. So do you want to take a bow and speak onto that regard?
Yeah, sure, because yeah, it's a very confusing situation. So the thing is, in chapter 184, basically it states that he transfers the positive charges to his enemies of his attacks. So obviously implying that when he hits someone, the positive charges go to them, and he uses negative charge to create a lightning, pretty much the sure hit lightning technique that he has. The issue is that it's never been said if it does or doesn't count on if someone hits him. So obviously we see in both in chapter 186 and also Panda and Hakari both saying when they touched him that they actually feel electricity and they actually get shocked. And so if you go with the assumption that by touching Kashimo you get the positive charge, which keep in mind, again, this was never said by the narrator or by the story. Kind of headcanony, but I want to say it's true because it makes sense. Again, it's never actually been said, so it's just an assumption. But if you want to assume that just by hitting him, or by him blocking, so when you get that electricity around you, when you get shocked, if you think the person that hits him gets a positive charge, then you do think that he carries the charge, and then eventually, even if he just blocks, he could make a sure hit lightning hit.
Yeah. And if that is true, then I agree that Kashimo will win, because then it takes away one of the biggest strengths from Uru, being able to kind of zone but get somewhat close with using her ability of Thin Ice Missile and also Sky Manipulation. But my reasoning for potentially that it doesn't was, you can of course go and recount this because I could have counted wrong. However, against Panda, he touched him 6 times before he used electricity. In 188, he touched Hakari 6 times if you count him using the container onto his head as well. So my guess was that it takes around 6 hits for him to build up positive charges, then to use his ability of lightning discharge. However, what do you think in that regard?
I think even if it's just 6, like let's say that's the like highball we're doing, so it's against him, it's still incredibly a short amount, because I remember there are a lot of people actually assume that maybe Kashimo can only use it a couple times in a fight, which is like not true. Exactly what you said, actually, how you said it's only 6 hits, so it's really easy to charge up. And also, yeah, he spammed it quite a lot to the point where he could use it in many different ways and in tricky ways. So 100%. Even if what you're saying is true, which I think you made like a great analysis right there, I still think that's good.
And I agree. The only issue, and this is where I lean towards Uru, is because I don't believe Uru would be stupid enough to let herself get hit 6 times in this situation, especially off her ability of Sky Manipulation. So I assume she would be able to create the distance and then potentially try use her ability of Thin Ice Missile. But you brought up a very good point that she has to be relatively somewhat close to him, which makes it harder for her to obviously get away. So the thing is, and I think this is a discussion we're going to have, with what we can infer from the fight in Sendai, every time she used Thin Ice Missile or her big moves, Yuta would use reverse curse technique. and we know that Kashimo does not have reverse curse technique. So in terms of him potentially surviving something that breaks through your guard, it can be very difficult for him to survive. Moreover, his ability of sky manipulation. Even in hand-to-hand combat, he was distorting space against Yuta to prevent himself from fighting back. Meaning, this is why it's important to differentiate between, do you think if she punches him, she gets affected? Because then she would still be affected by the negative charges that could be built up. Or if not, then she would be able to survive because she can distort the space from Kashimo, preventing him from necessarily fighting back in hand-to-hand combat. What would you think?
I think it's pretty interesting because, by the way, I also think like Kashimo, he's a durable man. He's very durable. I think I don't want to say endurance because Yuta can definitely endure a lot. Like having his whole hand like fried to completely atomized, pretty much, and he doesn't even flinch. Kind of crazy. So I want to say endurance at the very least are the same, but I think in durability, I do want to say Kashimo's better than Yuta actually, simply because of the fact that he took so many hits from Jackpot Hakari for over 13 minutes, and what we saw by the end of the fight was he didn't even lose because he was hurt. I actually think he didn't even have a scratch on him. All that he had was like he did bleed from punches, but all he had was dried blood. That was actually Hakari's blood on his face. So he wasn't actually wounded at all after 13 minutes of Jackpot. So obviously that depends on if you think, maybe Yuta's more durable. I think Yuta's not that durable. I think his reverse curse technique is what makes him so tanky, as well as like the reinforcement. But that's another debate, like for another day. But I think what was interesting, what you said was like how she can distort space around her, right?
Yes.
So I remember we were talking about this actually before we started recording. How like so you made a great point how you actually think the lightning would actually bypass the distorted space. Like, what do you think about that as well?
So in terms of so if we're going to say in a situation that Kashimo has already built up his charges, I don't believe Uro can actually survive because of the properties of electricity. So obviously if you planted positive and negative charges, it's going to be like a conductor, so it's going to go through a linear line to then touch whatever thing is. So for example, the way electricity is, you have to go from the positive to the negative charges. And with the fact that he has accumulated enough, regardless if she distorts the space, it would follow whatever position Uro is from my understanding. Meaning that it would be very difficult for Uro to survive if he was to build up his charges. But my avenue of mostly him winning is the fact that I don't believe he'll be able to build up enough charges because of her ability of sky manipulation to distort potential punches that could add positive charges to her. Another good example is Uro obviously distorts the arm from Yuta. We could potentially see, could she distort the lightning to prevent it from going to its original spot? So in the fight we saw that Yuta's arm was distorted, then it goes back to place. So it could be a situation where the lightning is distorted, but then the charges are just set off in a different direction, which wouldn't get to Uro, but I'm less inclined to believe that. But it's another feat that could potentially boost Uro.
I also think it also depends on. So I actually don't agree with this argument. I'm just going to say this because I know people are going to say this in the comments. Some people think Kashimo is... I also kind of agree with this, but I don't like wank him this hard. I don't give him like this insane like lightning speed wank. But some people actually think he's extremely fast in his base. So maybe not lightning speed, but I just think it amps his speed. Maybe you could argue that he could blitz her with his staff and his like multiple attacks. Maybe get a hit on. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, to even build on that, I agree. Listen, I think this is something I think speed, when we get to the very top tiers, is a little overrated, because I don't think any top tier is blitzing another top tier, in my opinion. Just because of the way the series has been portrayed, there isn't, even if someone is significantly faster, it hasn't been shown to a point where they can completely blitz someone, that I felt as if, even if he has a speed advantage, I still think she can react to certain things. A good example is, and even I don't agree that Megami reacted, however, the fact that Megami could even potentially perceive Toji's speed in Shibuya can highlight with such a big difference in stats that speed isn't necessarily the most important factor in fights. But what do you think?
I think, honestly, like, even if I give Kashimo a tiny bit of wang, I think he's pretty fast. All right, maybe faster than average, but again, like, just like how you say, I don't think he's like that much faster that Uro like can't even react to it. That's 100%. The thing. Because I'm not saying Uro's as fast as him per se, but like you said, they're at least relative, and it's also a reaction like feat, so she could at least react to it. That's the thing. She doesn't need to be like as exactly fast. As, even if she's like a tiny bit slower. Yeah, it should be fine.
Agreed, and I completely agree with that. So that is one avenue. So in terms of that, that depends on your interpretation. And obviously we'll ask you, what do you think in that regard? Another what if scenario is obviously the domain expansion. So we are unaware of what Uru's domain expansion is, as well as we are unaware of what Kashimo's curse technique is. But based on what Kashimo is in the fight, we're not going to use it because he only wants to save it for Sukuna, and we still don't know what Uro's domain is, and he also has Hollow Wicker Basket. So we talked about this briefly, but what do you think about the domain what if?
Yeah, it just really depends on what type of a domain Uro has. So if she has a sure hit kill domain, so even if it's a guaranteed hit, even if it's harmless, in theory, he should still be able to counter it. It just depends on what type of a harmless it is. So if it's something like Hakari's, where the guarantee hit hits Hakari itself, or it's like an area of effect type of domain, well then Kashimo's screwed. Or if it's something where, like, let's say Megami's domain, even though that was incomplete, let's say it's just something that boosts her ability to like a crazy extent. Or maybe she can just use Sky everywhere without even touching it. Well, yeah, Kashimo's screwed. But again, like, if it's a sure hit technique, this is actually like horrendous for Uro. So when Uro deactivates her curse technique, she's gonna be defenseless because she can't use the Sky at that point.
Yep. And in that regard, if Hollow Wicker Basket was to negate her domain, I believe Kashimo wins, because like we saw in the fight against Sendai, she was unable to use her curse technique, and it just pretty much would be a complete slaughter at that point. So I think in that regard, that's another good avenue for where Kashimo can win. Those are the main what if scenarios. So to kind of conclude and to get to that part, and this is going to be more asking of the audience, do you believe first, does Kashimo can block attacks and add charges? If you believe he does, then I agree that Kashimo will win. If he can't, then I'm more likely to agree that Uro will win. So in that regard, I've got Uro winning. If you think that the domain is something that's a short hit that can be negated by Hollow Wicker Basket, then I think it's most likely that Kashimo will win again, because it's very difficult for Uro to be able to use her curse technique straight after a domain. Let's go with our own interpretation. So who do you think will actually win this fight? And then we'll leave the rest to the comment section and what people will think.
Listen, I love Uro. I think she's very powerful and incredibly underrated, like insanely underrated, especially because of Sendai. Like, she's the walking only fan, like everyone loves. But, you know, Kashimo, I just think he takes it. I just think he's too durable, too strong. He's got too much going on. He's just raw. He's just too raw. He's just clean as fuck. Mr. Lightning, Mr. All Day, Every Day. I think Kashimo takes it, man.
Kashimo takes it. Okay, so for the sake of, I'm going to stick with Uro, and I'm going to say Uro takes it. I think for the most part, obviously there's a lot of depending scenarios on potentially Kashimo and Uro, so I have to leave that to interpretation of the people. However, I believe with Thin Ice Missile breaking guard and her ability of Sky manipulation, she might be able to prevent some of the hand-to-hand combat from Kashimo, as well as breaking his guard. And with him not having reverse curse technique, it could be very difficult for him to survive multiple attacks from Thin Ice Missile. So I'm going to stick with Uro wins, but I say she wins. If we're going to say out of 10, 6 out of 10 times.
If it's 10 times, the issue is there's like so many what ifs of like as you said, blocking. If you get a charge from blocking, if Uro has reverse curse technique, what the domain expansion is. I'm gonna be honest, I can't put a number on it. There's just so many what ifs. My gut is just telling me like 7, maybe 8 out of 10 times to Kashimo.
7 or 8 times to Kashimo. So that will conclude on our obviously thoughts. I am sticking with Team Uro. Obviously Kashimo wins, let us know down below. And if you think Uro wins, let us know down below. Make sure to obviously go check Kayo's channel. He does a lot of JJK content and he posts very regularly as well. So make sure to go check it out. And thank you guys for watching, and